watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day Thursday. The Asian Development Bank expects the domestic economy to register a higher growth this year. The lender retains its GDP forecast for 2022 despite risks from the war in Eastern Europe.
New vaccine cards, business groups throw their weight behind proposals to require proof of COVID-19 booster shots by June.
Unemployment rate remains steady in February. This as more workers have joined the labor force.
And on the corporate front, flag carrier Philippine Airlines returns to profit in 2021 with its net income amounting to more than 60 billion pesos. We begin our broadcast with the Asian Development Bank retaining its GDP outlook for the Philippines this year.
The ADB says nearly all indicators point to higher growth for the country despite risks from the Russia-Ukraine war. The Manila-based lender kept its growth forecast at 6% for 2022, higher than the actual GDP growth of 5.6% recorded last year. In 2023, ADB expects the domestic economy to expand by up to 6.3%. The ADB says domestic investment and consumption are continuing to rebound as there is now more economic activities on the back of relaxed restrictions. The lender says the outlook was unchanged because of the country's relatively small trade and financial links to Russia and Ukraine. ADB says the Russia-Ukraine war is the biggest risk to growth, as it will primarily impact inflation and may result in second-round effects. However, ADB's projection remains lower than the government's goal of 7 to 9% growth for this year.
Now, unemployment rate in the Philippines decreased to 6.4% in February. That's from 8.8% the year before. Now, month on month, unemployment rate remained unchanged. However, the actual figures show a slight uptick in the number of Filipinos who are jobless. That is from 2.9 million on January to 3.1 million in February. This is as more Filipinos joined the labor force in February. Meanwhile, the underemployment rate slightly decreased month on month from 14.9% to 14% in February of 2022. This translates to about 6.4 million unemployed persons in the country. These figures were reported by the national statistician Dennis Mapa just this morning. Now, health officials continue to push Filipinos to get their COVID-19 booster shots.
And to bring up vaccination figures, President Duterte is now calling for the conduct of house-to-house inoculations. Mobile journalist Pamela Vasquez with a story.
With millions of COVID-19 vaccines nearing expiry, President Duterte is considering ordering house-to-house inoculation drives.
Yung hindi pa nabakunahan, marami pa yan. Kailangan lumabas na at mabakuna sila.
That's after Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship Joey Concepcion flagged that there are 27 million doses expiring in July because take-up for booster shots has been very slow. Health experts say there's a misconception that 2 shots gives enough protection.
Definitely, over time, the neutralizing antibodies induced by the vaccines wane, and the booster will really help protect you even longer and even better.
The low booster take-up is especially worrisome, considering the many large gatherings leading up to the elections, all of which experts say could turn into super spreader events. So even now, there's talk of changing the definition of fully vaccinated.
We have to include the booster shot in the definition of what is a fully vaccinated individual para maging insentibo para sa ating mga kababayan na magpabakuna.
The IATF is also set to hold special vaccination days in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, which has the lowest vaccination rate in the country. Mobile journalist Pamela Vasquez, We Are One News.
Business chambers are now supporting the proposal to require people entering establishments to present proof of having received their booster shots by June. Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship Joey Concepcion said groups backing the booster requirement include the Philippine Franchise Association, Philippine Retailers Association, and the Philippine Marketing Association, among others. Concepcion adds that some airlines and restaurants would also like to offer various incentives for customers who have received their booster shots. Okay, to talk more about their push to require booster vaccination, we have on the show Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship, Joey Concepcion. Good morning, Sir Joey. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Jess and Danny. Good morning.
Okay, sir, primarily, what's holding back the DOH really from requiring booster vaccination here? Is the thought of making it mandatory? In fact, you have Health Secretary Francisco Duque, in a way, passing the buck to Congress that they can at least make a law requiring such. But, you know, senators, particularly Senate President Tito Soto, seems to be cool to the idea here. How do you respond to that? How do you really strike a balance this time when it comes to requiring booster shots and at the same time not making it mandatory or not infringing upon the rights of others?
Well, to make it mandatory, a law has to be passed, and that's unlikely to be done, especially in this election. And it's also hard to, drag people and then just jab them without their real consent. So we have to just find ways and means, and we have done that in the past. If you remember, when the vaccine uptake was very low, we restricted movement. Basically, no vax, no ride. Basically, not able to enter the restaurants without a vaccine card, entering movies, gyms, etc. So the vaccination cards were used. No? But as we all know, that these vaccines are starting to wane, and we have to maintain the wall of immunity, as Secretary Galvez has pointed out countless of times, that the vaccines are here purchased for our people. Now, if these vaccines will not be taken, we will be wasting billions of pesos on buying these vaccines. Of course, some of them were bought by the private sector, so it's private sector money. And you have got donations from COVAX, which is free. But still, these vaccines have value. And of course, the government, which used taxpayers' money for the vaccines, to be able to inoculate its own citizens. No? So as moving forward, we will see this waning immunity happen in the second half of this year. No?
Sir, just to pick up on that, are other countries still doing this as they reopen their economies? Is there still this requirement, not just for the booster being mandatory, but also to enter establishments? Kailangan pa ba nagpapakita ng mga vaccine card? Or is this still happening in the United States and Europe, or aren't they already facing this out?
In the United States, when I was there, when I arrived, it was mandatory. In fact, to enter the Coliseums and to watch the NBA games, you not only had to have the vaccination card, but you had the booster card. Plus, you had to show an ID. In the Philippines, the consistency of people checking IDs is not there. No, they look at the vaccine cards, but they don't look at the IDs. So in America, they were very strict. Now, they've already taken this all out because in certain states where the vaccination is high, there is no need to check vaccination cards. To my mind, and for example, in NCR, we're above 100% vaccinated already. So I wouldn't even check the vaccination cards already because one, the entire area is fully vaxxed. Number two, these vaccinations have been taken already. So we should move forward and look at how many of them are taking boosters. Now in NCR, only 30% have taken the boosters. So that is where the drive has to happen because in Singapore, they define fully vaccinated as one who has taken the primary doses and the booster shot. No? So in many engagements with medical doctors, they are supportive of this idea. I pushed it forward to Secretary Duque. He's open to the idea. And I just referred to him some areas that have been doing, defining this thing as fully vaccinated being primary doses and one booster shot. There are other ideas that primary dose plus the first and second booster shots. No? So I think everybody is moving in this direction, but we have to move at a greater speed because by July, these vaccines will be expiring. And we are actually trying to already send some of these vaccines from the private sector to Myanmar, no? Because we have fully inoculated our people already. And in the private sector, it's close to 90 to 100%. No?
Sir, more specific question, what about the issue that some people don't want to get boosters because they've already gotten COVID? You know, there's all these issues on the timing on whether you got COVID already, how many times you've gotten COVID, whether you still need this booster shots. There are, you know, some questions on the efficacy of a fourth booster shot on the immunity system. How do we circumvent this complication of, yun nga po, some people having had COVID recently, not having booster shots, still wanting to be a part of the economy?
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, there was a number of people who got COVID sometime January, February this year, no, through Omicron. And I guess they can provide for that. I mean, a provision that provided they show that there were a positive RT-PCR tests. Maybe DOH can look into that. But nevertheless, the immunity even natural immunity does not last long. No? According to the medical advices that we've been talking to, in fact, it's shorter than the immunity granted by the vaccines. No? So, but nevertheless, yes, that is one of the reasons why we're also at a great spot today. Not only that vaccination was given, but also people got infected and have natural immunity. But this all wanes. No? Even natural immunity does wane.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess more to the point also, Sir Joey, is there fear that there's going to be another wave or surge in infections should a booster take-up remain low, especially now that we have concerns over another variant possibly entering our source, the Omicron XE?
Yes, that's true. And if we look at it, most other countries, I mean, we're quite lucky, no? In Asia, I mean, the Philippines has been spared of this surge. No? We had our surge sometime in October. Look at what happened to Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, China, Hong Kong. I mean, all our neighboring countries have had the worst of these surges. And we in the Philippines, through the efforts of the public and private sector, and of course our citizens who took the primary doses, we were able to protect ourselves and strengthen our immunity. So the strategy of vaccinating our people has been correct. Now, we of course, people, when you see cases going down, people get complacent. They say that, oh, maybe I'll just take it some other time because there's no cases, which is true. There are hardly any, my friends and relatives, nobody is sick. So we are overconfident. Now, that overconfidence can lead us into bigger problems in the second semester. So what we are always looking forward is the private sector wants to see greater visibility. We are now doing very well. The economy is bouncing back. The MSMEs are bouncing back. Banks are lending. There's a lot of mobility out there. School is going to open. And we're getting our workers back to the offices instead of just staying at home. All of this mobility, there are always risks. And now we hear of variants that are threatening other countries in New York and in Paris and even in Asia. So we will be vulnerable to all of this eventually as our own vaccines will do wane. So that's why the boosters are very important. No? And of course, 27 million vaccines will expire by July, and that is a waste of money.
Okay. I also want to pick up on one point you mentioned earlier. This has been pretty much established that vaccine efficacy wanes over time. That also brings into the conversation the need for a fourth dose, especially considering that those who have had their booster, at least in the latter part of last year and even earlier this year, might actually see their immunity waning over time. So is this something that the private sector is also going to make a push for in the near future?
Yeah, definitely. In the U.S., they have started to give the fourth dose for 50 years and above, and I think that will more or less be mirrored here in the Philippines. But we're not even talking yet of the fourth dose. I mean, I'm due for my fourth dose next month, but we're just only talking of the third dose, which is very low at about 13% on the national level now. To get that to at least 60% in the next 2 months, we really have to move immediately. And if we will wait for the people to decide, and those vaccines will definitely expire. So we have to resort to granting incentives, restricting mobility for those who are not boosted. We have to do those things. And of course, people would say, that's my right, that's my freedom. You're violating all of this. But what is at stake? It's not just the health of our people, but the health of the economy, especially with the Ukraine-Russia crisis that is affecting all of us in terms of surging commodity prices, which is leading to huge high levels of inflation, which will affect consumer spending. And of course, then our MSMEs and all the other entrepreneurs and businessmen, and of course, job employment will definitely backslide. And we go back to where we came from, which is, it will be frustrating, no?
Okay, sir, last question before we let you go. Given all the risks here, imminent risks of a possible new variant, would you still be in favor of maintaining, you had a previous position of baka we can actually just scrap altogether this alert level system, or is that now something that's too preemptive? We might be reverting back to, the previous alert levels. Is there still a possibility for the business community to say, okay, we might actually have to shut down again? Or is this a thing of the past with or without a new variant?
Well, everybody looks forward to eventually having a zero alert level. No, we see that in America today, we see that in other countries today. And I think at this current state, we could move to alert level 0. But the problem is, with the booster uptake at this level of 13%, it's going to be too risky to even move to that level, because unless we are fully boosted at the right time and we see cases go down and the vaccination level is high, then we can go back to normal. Especially today, the cases are really down. Despite the huge rallies all over the country, you don't see a surge. But again, because our immunity is still holding at this point in time.
Okay, again, thank you very much for your insights this morning. It's really going to be a very careful balancing act as we make that push for booster vaccination here in the country. Thank you for your time this morning, Sir Joey Concepcion, Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Danny.
Now, in other news, more Filipinos made it to the Forbes World's Billionaires list for this year. That's despite the economic impact of the pandemic.
And keeping the #1 spot is real estate tycoon and former Senate President Manny Villar. Villar is joined by 19 other Filipinos included in the elite billionaires list. Forbes reports that Villar's estimated net worth ballooned to $8.3 billion this year. He now ranks 263rd among global billionaires, a huge jump from 352 last year. The second richest Filipino is still Ports tycoon Enrique Razon Jr. with worldwide ranking of 369 and a net worth of $6.7 billion. The third wealthiest Filipinos were SM Investments' Henry C. Jr. and Alliance Global's Andrew Tan with a net worth of $2.8 billion each. Brothers Hans C. and Herbert C., meanwhile, shared the fifth spot with an estimated net worth of $2.6 billion each. Among the 20 Filipino billionaires, 5 were newcomers. These are Betty Ang, Grace Uy, Nari Ramesh, and Sunder Henomal, and Dennis Anthony Uy. Coming right up after the break. Losses no more. PAL Holdings registers a turnaround after posting more than 60 billion pesos in income last year.
We'll check how that stock is performing when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
Three minutes.
still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
All right, Dan, U.S. Fed signals are seen to whipsaw markets yet again. Break that down for us.
As you can see on my terminal here, a sea of red, and like you mentioned, stocks in Asia falling this Thursday. That's after the Federal Reserve outlined the plans to pare its balance sheet by over $1 trillion a year, while hiking interest rates in a push to curb that elevated inflation, 4-decade high. There is minutes of the meeting there signaling half-point rate increases under consideration. So a lot of tightening, and investors are basically worried, Jess, that all of this might be too fast, too soon, and that might lead to a recession if consumers cannot handle it. Now, you can see on my terminal here, Asia as well, in the red, trading in the red this morning. In contrast to what is happening over in the U.S., China naman wants to loosen monetary policy over there, especially since they are experiencing another escalating COVID outbreak. And you've got Russia, meanwhile, slipping closer to a technical default. Foreign banks did not process around $650 million of payments on their debt. They had to offer rubles instead. One good issue here is the price of oil, although today it's going back a touch, but still going closer to the $100 per barrel level. This is now around the lowest price since mid-March. What happened again? International Energy Agency said it will deploy 60 million barrels from their emergency stockpiles to bolster what the release was announced already by the United States. Now let's open our own domestic markets here. You can see us enjoying some gains in the mining and oil counter that's up by 0.4%. Holding firms as well swinging back to gains after having a couple of days of losses, but still the composite or index down by 0.1%. That's at 7,102. Now, one clear sector to be watching out for, financials, that's down by 0.3%. This on the back of an uptick of bad loans in February. So a lot of challenges. This is according to Mike Ricafort of RCBC. People are still having, and also ING's Nikki Mapa, people are still having difficulties, challenges paying back their debts, even as the economy is gradually reopening. Jess, our industry's NPL ratio, however, stood at 86.12%. So, the bank's still able to manage these debts that are falling badly. And Fitch Ratings, meanwhile, also said that the higher business costs and inflation in Ukraine could affect the growth opportunities, but unlikely to drive a sharp increase in the loan delinquencies, Jess.
All right, Dan, this is something we've been talking about since the start of the program. In contrast to Cebu Pacific, which recorded a net loss of 25 billion, close to 25 billion pesos last year, our flag carrier, PAL Holdings, finally seeing things turning around. Tell us more.
Exactly. So you could see that on my terminal here. PAL is jumping by 10 centavos this morning. That is up by 1.6%. This, of course, as you mentioned, a turnaround in the net losses. And this comes after, on the heels of, Cebu Pacific having already said that they had quite some losses in 2021. Now, what happened to PAL? They saw net income improve to 60.6 billion pesos in 2021 from a loss that was much bigger than that in 2020, 73.1 billion pesos in 2020 of a loss. What they did mention is that the revenues were up by 6.2%, mainly due to the cargo revenues. A lot of cargo was done by PAL in 2021. Another thing is they cut their operating expenses, so really aggressive cut here. Of course, they just came out of the bankruptcy filing here, so they cut their expenses by 23.3%. Of course, also because of the decline in passenger service. But again, PAL hopefully on its way to continuous profit as the years come by.
Here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. The Bangko Sentral plans to begin the pilot circulation of its 1,000 peso polymer bills this second quarter. Full issuance to the public is targeted by next year. BSP officials formally presented the polymer banknotes to President Duterte last night. The BSP says the first batch of polymer banknotes produced in Australia is scheduled to arrive in the Philippines this month.
Now, the Bangko Sentral says consumer complaints declined by about 17% to about 19,000 in 2021. That's from the over 23,000 complaints recorded in 2020. Now, citing the BSP, the Philippine Star reports that almost half of the total number of consumer complaints last year were processed through the automated chatbot BSP Online Buddy. This was a significant increase in the utilization of the online channel, which logged nearly 13% of the total complaints in 2020. In that year, the BSP reported a 152% jump in complaints due to the increased concerns about the implementation of the financial assistance packages under the Bayanihan laws.
Pantheon Macroeconomics believes inflation is not likely to significantly exceed the Bangko Central's 2 to 4% target range for the year. Pantheon Chief Economist for Emerging Asia, Miguel Chanco, revised his inflation forecast for the Philippines to 3.9% from 3.5%. Chanco does not expect the inflation surge to last long despite the lagging impact of higher oil prices following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Because of this, the research consultancy firm maintained that policy normalization is still unlikely anytime soon. And that's a first look into the business day this Thursday, April 7, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.